Annie Ann, thank you for taking the time out on today's Wednesday. It's Wednesday, April 1st. Losing track of these days. It's all blending together. It's 7 o'clock out on the East Coast, 4 o'clock out on the West Coast. If wherever you are, hopefully you have a glass of wine or something in your hands and you're ready for an awesome event. So Annie Ann, take it away.
Hi, everyone.
Hi, everyone.
All right. Hello, everyone. My name is Annie Dunbar. I'm originally from Lexington, Kentucky, and went to the University of Kentucky. Go Cats. I interned up in Bristol at ESPN my last semester of college and got hired back a couple of months after I graduated. So my career in sports has been spent at ESPN. It's been an amazing 5 years. A lot of things have changed since I first joined. When Nita was at ESPN with me a few years ago, we were a team of maybe like 15 people, and now our team is like 50 people large. It's been amazing to see all of the growth and development that we've created. We just jotted down some of our favorite things just to get to know us a little more personally. My favorite athlete of all time is Jared Lorenzen. Growing up in Lexington, I attended quite a few Kentucky football games for good and all the good and the bad, mostly bad, but there's still a few good moments in there. My favorite sporting event I've ever covered was the 2018 NBA Finals and seeing LeBron's last game in Cleveland. I'm college football through and through, but there's nothing like the NBA Finals. My favorite social platform is Instagram. If you follow me on Twitter, like I'm probably a bad follow, but I do check it. I don't tweet a lot, but I do love Instagram and use it all the time. I don't
think you're a TikTok person, Annie.
I'm not on TikTok yet, but we have to use it all the time. But yeah, I love Instagram and like how easy it is to diversify your content. So that's my personal favorite.
Okay, we can go to the next. Yeah, there we go. Okay, hi all. I'm Ann.
That's pretty damn. Sure
it's just a great pick.
Shout out to our photographer, Fred Daniels. Y'all should hire him if you need a photographer. He's great. So I went to Georgia. I'm born in Commerce, Georgia, which is about 30 minutes outside of Athens. So I went to Georgia for school, and then after that, I was at the SEC for 3.5 years. I just started at ESPN in January, so I'm very new and very fresh. But yeah, so that was kind of what I've been doing since college. And then my favorite athlete is Tiger Woods. And then my favorite game covered was the Rose Bowl, obviously, in 2018. That was also like our first post or playoffs coverage for SEC social. So that was like big for career, but also just me as a Georgia fan. And then my favorite social platform is Twitter.com. I love it there so much. So.
All right. So for this like seminar, we're going to go through just some college football, like top level things, as well as some game day things. But day to day, our jobs are to distribute content and create content for ESPN SportsCenter, all of our sport accounts, and some of our show accounts as well. So I'm like the college football lead for our team, but also work on everything else. So if there are any questions outside of college football, like feel free to ask those as well. We kind of wrote out like what a typical Saturday is for college game day. A lot of time that's what I get asked, like, what does your day look like? What's your travel schedule like? So during the season, we head to whatever town we're in on Thursdays. Fridays consist of production meetings and shoots. We normally work with like Kirk Herbstreit and Maria Taylor to grab some players from the home team and do shoots, whether that's like around campus, at a facility. When we were in Athens, we did a shoot with like Quavo, whatever celebrities are around, we try to grab them and do shoots with them during the day and spend Friday night editing. We get to the stage like where everything is set up about 3 hours before, which is normally around like 6 a.m. Depending on which side of the coast you're on. If we're West Coast, we obviously get there around like 3 o'clock in the morning. So it's an early day. And first when we get to site, we go go around and get everybody who had like spent the night in a tent or whatever the case may be to get front row to game day, and just start taking as many photos of signs as we can. We really try to make sure that there's no conflict when it comes to brands, because we do have sponsored executions that we do for game day. So we have to make sure that we're not violating any of those restrictions, and also have to make sure that there's no like profanity or like hidden meaning. And as most people can imagine, and know, there's a lot of that when it comes to college students. So we have to be really careful with that. So we go through and get as many signs as we can, collect all of that. We also wait for like Kirk and Coach Corso to come to the stage and go up on stage and get, Corso waving the helmets around, like getting the crowd riled up, and are capturing all of that in real time. We get like Kirk and Reese to do maybe like an opening slide, or do like an Instagram live beforehand on their accounts as well. So we go through all of the content capturing. And once the show starts, that's when we really start to like upload and tweet things out, because normally that's when most people are awake on Saturday mornings. So we go through and build out an Instagram story. It's sponsored for us every week. So we have to add like lower third branding. And we normally sit in like wet grass on our laptops with Photoshop open to build out those Instagram stories. We're also working with a team that's back in Bristol who's cutting everything in real time and looking for, the features, because that's one of the things people love about college game day are the features that the production side brings to the show every week. So we're working with our team in Bristol and looking over the rundown to make sure that we know like when headgear is coming every week, when the guest picker is coming up on stage. So behind the scenes, we're waiting on like guest picker and try to get videos with them, whether that's like Matthew McConaughey, Quavo, whoever the case may be. We try to get time with them if we can. And then throughout the show, we're just working with everyone in Bristol. And then we know like, okay, at this point, this is the last commercial break before headgear. And we go back on stage to sit behind the cameras and capture it on our phones for the Instagram story. And get coach's headgear pick at the end, grab that, and depending on what time the game is starting, we'll run to the stadium. So on a good Saturday, we get to eat lunch. That's not at the stadium. When we were at Alabama, LSU, and Tuscaloosa, the game started almost immediately after the game day ended. So it was like we got to book it because President Trump was there coming to the game as well. So we had to go through Secret Service. So it was a matter of like, this is going to take additional time. We can't be late. We can't miss kickoff. So we get to the stadium, start looking for like the media room, try to get things set up as quickly as possible and run straight out to the game. So most Saturdays we're working from 6 a.m. until sometimes 1 o'clock in the morning, depending on the game and what time the kickoff is. But during the game, we're producing Instagram stories, doing Instagram live, getting content for our talent, live tweeting from the sidelines, and posting to Facebook as well. Does anyone have any questions? Yeah, if you want to go.
I was going to say, I can talk about this slide. I know a little bit about Instagram stories. I know I'm new, so I couldn't really go for the game day rundown for you guys. But yeah, so for Instagram stories, we just built this slide in because thinking about the fact that a lot of what we are doing when we're on site is obviously capturing content to share on Facebook or Twitter where appropriate, but also to share, mostly to build out the Instagram story and produce that. So just a few like quick things that we kind of thought would be maybe important is thinking about like storyboarding in advance, what you can do with your Instagram story. So obviously you can't really anticipate what's going to happen in the game, but you kind of know like what are some key points you need to hit. For instance, like knowing your intro slide, having an ending in mind, knowing if sponsors are involved, what that looks like. And then also too, just maybe like pre-looking, like one tip Annie had given me one time was just looking through the GIFs that are on Instagram and knowing what like tools are available so that when you're in the minute trying to find like a Clemson GIF or something, you're not just like searching endlessly. You kind of already like pick those out, just to like give you time in the moment to really be able to do it, appropriately. And then obviously, yes, like being in all of sports for anything we do, being prepared to adjust on the fly. Because we kind of talked about like the CFB playoff when LSU and Oklahoma were playing, like after a while, LSU's just scoring the whole time. So that's going to get somewhat boring and a repetitiveness on the story. So you have to like try to figure out other creative shots that you can get, whether that's like crowd involvement or just finding different angles of showing the energy and excitement in the building. Because, the touchdowns are like, when you're watching a story, it just almost seems a little repetitive. And then the last bullet that we added, obviously educating yourself on the players and teams before, it kind of goes into the same thing as looking through the gifts and stuff ahead of time, just knowing like, all right, what, records could Joe Burrow break tonight? Or if Clemson had won the national championship, that would have been 30 wins in a row. Just like high level things that you probably already know because you're consuming the sport, but also just going through and really writing those down so that, again, you're not like rushed to find good copy for the slides when you're in the moment. And then Annie also mentioned too, like knowing who the key players are on the teams, because then you can kind of keep an eye on the field and looking where they are, and hopefully you can get the shot, because football is much different than some other sports. But I mean, if you are on the wrong side of the field or on the wrong end, you're going to miss the shot because you can't get down there fast enough. So just anticipating where, that team could be going, which player, just knowing those key players is helpful too. So a lot of it is like, you can do a lot of things in advance to at least make yourself feel less stressed in the moment when, the game starts, because like we said, you don't always know how the game's going to go. So, it's hard to like predict that part of it, but just doing the small things on the front end can kind of help, like when you get to the game and are actually producing the story live.
Yeah.
Questions sorry, go ahead.
I think one of the hardest things that took me a while to accept was like, you won't always get the shot you want. You're going to end up on the wrong side of the field for something, and it's going to be frustrating in real time because it might feel like the end of the world and that was the one shot you had to get. But I know for me, when I was at the national championship with Alabama and Georgia, towards the end, like, as soon as the game ends, all the photographers, TV people, social people, whatever the case may be, are just rushing the middle of the field. And I remember thinking, like, I was trying to follow a celebrity. I don't remember who it was, but I lost them in the crowd. And I was so bummed because I was like, that would have been great content. But I was just openly filming, and I turned around and saw the Ridley brothers, like hugging and embracing after the game. And I was like, oh, this is awesome. Like, what a great family moment. And I was still videotaping, so I got all of their embrace. And that ended up being, I think it's still the highest engaging tweet we've ever sent from the ESPN college football account. It did crazy numbers. It did better numbers than our championship graphics, than anything that we had pre-produced. And I just happened to come upon it. So I think one of the biggest things that I try to remind myself is like, okay, well, I missed this shot, but what else is going on? Is there someone in the crowd? Are there player celebrations that I can still grab in the end zone? Anything like that. So I think just knowing that it's okay if you didn't get that touchdown, but just turn around and be aware of your surroundings and see what else is going on, because you never know.
Yeah. There's a couple of questions on the Instagram stories front. How many number of stories, I should say, is a good number?
We stick to between 8 and 12. I think once you go past 12, you're doing too much. You want to be able to do enough to tell a story, but you don't want to overdo it and oversaturate your content either.
What happens if you've already hit that number, but then you get a great shot at the end? Do you just break that rule? What's that line that you?
I always aim for 10 to leave room to do 2 more.
Interesting. Mm-hmm. When you're building the content on the fly, I think you mentioned that you're sending stuff back to Bristol, but how much of that are you doing natively through your own phone, to just get it up there as quick as possible because you got that good shot? And on a second point on that question, what kind of apps or tools are you using outside of what Instagram has native to kind of build the creative on your phones?
So it all depends on service. If we can tweet it from the field, we'll just tweet it natively. and roll with that. If we're having issues, we will use iMessage and run to a tunnel and connect to like media Wi-Fi and send it back, because we know like we can send it to someone who can upload it quicker, because it sends quicker as an iMessage than it does as a tweet sometimes. And then we'll run back to the field and make sure that we're not missing anything in real time. We don't use too many apps. Most of what we design are within Instagram stories. There's so many different features that I don't think people like tap into enough, with using the keyboard and different shapes and stuff, with all the different fonts that are on there. Like if you use a dash, you can, make so many different shapes, whether it's like a circular line, whether it's a rectangle, a square, whatever the case may be. So a lot of the design elements that we use in our Instagram stories are from the keyboard and not from any specific app.
What would you say is like the ideal position to be in if the ball's in the red zone?
Toss up. It's just a toss up.
Yeah, I was gonna say like I feel like it is a toss up, especially depending on like how big of a game it is, because obviously like at the national championship or at a playoff game or at something like that, you're competing with 1,000 other photographers and videographers as well to like get in the right spot. So sometimes, like you just have to like find a spot that you can at least get a good shot at. But yeah, I feel like it's a toss up, because if you think they're going to be on the left end of the end zone, they're probably going to go the other direction sometimes. But yeah.
Now I got a trap question for the both of you. And some of these schools might be represented on this webinar.
Oh boy.
What has the best and what has the worst stadium connectivity in college football?
Oh man.
The Mercedes. Okay, for the national championship, it was the worst.
That doesn't count though. It's not officially a college stadium. That doesn't count. Got to be a college, home, on campus, near campus, home field.
Honestly, like this is not going to answer your question, but this is just a thought that I have, is that I like when I'm trying to think about that, I know that some of the stadiums that I've been in, it's not always like, I feel like no matter what, like on field connectivity is essentially like shit. Like just when you're in there, it's just not, it just doesn't work. But I think the key is honestly what stadium has the best like immediate access out to like where the Wi-Fi is, like how close is their media workroom to the field, like how quick can I get there, like where is that proximity? Because if it's like gonna take me 5+ minutes to get there on foot, like then I'm gonna be taking more time. But like if it's just right off the field, then it's a little bit easier because you can go in and get to Wi-Fi. So that's one thing that I like always like notice when I get to a stadium is like where is the media workroom on field level, because everybody is kind of set up differently just in terms of like how much space they have and all that. But I feel like the places that have it pretty like easily accessible to a tunnel, those places are usually better because you can get there quicker, versus if it's like in the middle and kind of like on one side versus like right off of a tunnel.
I think the Swamp had the best service I've ever experienced, and it was amazing because we were in the end zone, captured touchdown, great, tweet immediately from where we were. We didn't have to move, which literally never happens. And it was a packed stadium and everything. So I would say that University of Florida has the best.
Wow.
I would just like to mention that Annie has talked about the national championship that Georgia lost, and now she's complimenting Florida. And I was Florida, and this is a lot.
I'm only complimenting the service at
the
Florida,
Wi-Fi,
not Florida itself. Okay,
yeah.
To be clear. I think one of the worst that I experienced was at Washington State. I remember having to like almost exit the stadium, like be at the gate to leave to get service. And that was crazy because obviously all of the fans were there for game day. There was a huge upset and all of the fans like stormed the field, and I had zero service to, do anything. And that was probably the worst. So sorry to Washington State fans then.
Portable charger does not count as an answer. But what is the one thing that you need to have with you in order to survive a sideline of a game?
Like always on us?
Yeah.
Portable charger is the answer. That is
Portable
the
charger
know.
is
There's
number one.
Portable chargers like so crucial.
The other one I might say is like, not everybody could have this luxury, but if it's available to you, like having two phones is helpful because you could be like uploading on one and like you still have one ready if something does happen. Or just even not, maybe if it's not even two phones, but just two ways of like capturing things is helpful.
Cool. Move on to the next slide.
So we just jotted down some wins that we saw across the board on all of our accounts last season. I think like one thing to touch on a little bit is you really like anyone who works in social knows this. Like so many things you think are like, wow, this is going to engage so well. I'm so excited about this, and then they flop, and you're like, I have no idea. But an example of one thing that I got from on site was when we were in Athens. I saw like Georgia mascot with a cute like bulldog, and I was like, this is amazing. I love dogs. This is incredible. And I, just turned around and like took a simple video of it and tweeted it. And it was one of the top tweets that we had on game day all season. And I was like, we created so much content. I spent, hours editing and doing all of these things. And the best tweet we had all season was this dog, which is great. I love dogs. But it's just funny sometimes to see like, this took minimal effort and this is what did the best. As far as other on-site content, bring back NCAA football video games. Everybody wants NCAA football to be brought back. So this was our highest engaging sign that we got from the season. And I put in this shoot that we did with Quavo when we were in Athens. I think that social very much knows this, but you are not a one-trick pony. You have to have an eye for design. You have to be able to use a camera. You have to have video editing skills. You have to know how to produce for TV versus how to produce for digital or social. And there's just a lot of things that go into it. And I think that sometimes that's a little lost on people who don't work in the space as much. Like for this Quavo shoot, like we, produced it bottom. We were coordinating with like game day talent. We got like David Pollack, Maria Taylor, Ric Flair was there, coordinating with like Quavo's people, Ric Flair's people, like our game day talent. I had like both phones ringing at all times for all of these people to get to one place, which seemed like the most difficult thing ever. And Quavo has like 6 people that are all his managers. So I kept getting these like numbers and it was a different manager each time. I was like, who is actually bringing this man? Like someone just tell me. So there's a lot of like coordination with people. And like we shot this and like we edited this. We had to edit it for like IGTV, a version for that, for Twitter, for Facebook, for ESPN.com. We had to send an edit for our Snapchat team. We had to send an edit for Game Day to roll on the show. So when you look at like our jobs, it's like, oh, like my parents don't necessarily understand social, but they'll be like, oh, so you like tweet on like Twitter for like a living. And I'm like, sure. But there's all these other things that go into it. We're producing stuff for TV, for digital, for social across the board. And I think that it's really important for.
I want to stop you there. In the 5 years that you've been at ESPN, has that still been the same? Have you seen the evolution where like there's still a theory that you just tweet and you're not that Swiss Army knife of a content creator?
I think that I more so was referencing my parents at this point, but I think that now there's been way more acceptance of social as a whole, and they lean on us for more in-depth things instead of like, hey, tweet this. Like there's still some of that. I think there always will be with some people who don't necessarily understand it as well and don't want to understand it. But I think that a lot of things have changed for the better when it comes to that. And the only other thing was we created this like office edit for the day of the CFP selection. And it just engaged super, super well. It's one of the best things that we posted throughout the year that we were really proud of. all of our, we have a bunch of teammates who love The Office. So they all got together and created this video. So.
I noticed you said you have a bunch of teammates that love The Office, and not you love The Office.
Not me.
Not me either, honestly. I'm so sorry to all the fans.
Yeah, I feel like that's like a hot take. That's like a take that, like, you know, it's like, what's your you don't like that everybody else likes? And that's The Office and coffee for me. So.
Okay, we're gonna brush past that real quick, but what's your clearance process on content like that? Because technically that's NBC, ESPN is owned by Disney, which is ABC.
I think that, you know, as we try to be, you know, competitors in the industry, there's a level of, you know, it just is what it is. We try not to break too many rules, but some things we let slide.
Fair Use Act. Read it. Slide.
This is just a question slide, obviously, clearly. I would try to add a GIF, but honestly, I was struggling, so I just screenshotted it. But obviously, these are our emails and our Twitter handles. So you can follow us. Like Annie said, she doesn't really tweet that much, so follow her on Insta instead.
Yeah, that'd be good.
Yeah, but yeah, so we're open for questions.
I've got some questions for you. Here's the first one from Care K. How do you maintain the CFB ESPN Game Day voice on social with the team of people posting off the account? It's a great question.
So what we try to do is keep the people who are posting to the Game Day account to a minimum. We have the same people work the same shifts every Saturday throughout the whole season. And in advance of the season, we go through and say, like, this is the tone that we're looking for. We try to keep the Game Day tone different than like the CFB tone, different than ESPN, different than SportsCenter. And I think that ultimately it can become a challenge when you have a large group of people posting to that many accounts. In reality, we have 4 people who post to the account. And we're all on the same page and aligned with like what the tone and voice should be.
What's your strategy right now to keep the audience engaged on social media without any sports going on?
That's a really great question that we're trying to figure out every day. ESPN as a whole, I think is doing a really great job right now serving fans with programming. Obviously with bringing The Last Dance up almost 2 months to serve fans during this time. And that provides us with content pretty directly. We can post, you know, Michael Jordan trailers and highlight rips and everything else. And that gives us a whole, you know, package of content. We also just have to get really creative and say like, okay, what do we think our fans want to see today? And I think what's helpful too, so like ESPN's re-airing the Rose Bowl tomorrow, and we know like Vince Young content does really well. Let's make a rip for him. So every day is just, you know, embracing the world we're living in right now and doing the best that we can.
I'm sure it's probably heavy on like creativity right now. You got to figure out what engages and just think back and be a sports fan again, which can be fun, but also can be really challenging of you don't know how long this is going to go on and how much more can you do?
Yeah. I feel like that's like my thing is like we think about it every day, and I always think to myself like, if we're still doing this in a couple months, like what are we gonna do then? But the good thing is like we're all doing this. Like this is not just affecting ESPN. Like this is affecting the like obviously everyone in the like whether they're in sports or not. And so I think that like we probably know like more people are on the internet right now. Maybe more people would be spending time doing things that they might not normally in their everyday life where they are more rushed and like the pace of life is a little different than the stay at home pace of life. So I think that there might be things that work now that might not work when we get back to normal because they might just not engage as well if people, you know, don't have all of this downtime to be on their phones and, you know, looking at social media a little bit more. So
Does a time like this give you some like runway to think back and reflect on this past season or previous seasons? I know Anne, you just joined, but Annie, like, are you at least thinking of what can we do differently moving forward for this fall? If football is back and coming this fall?
I haven't been able to yet. I think that I was talking to my parents about this today. I think like work has been way more stressful now than it was during the college football season, which is trying to figure out and balance all of these different asks that we have coming from all of the different departments, because they're kind of relying on social as like the forward facing platform for our company. So we were just talking about like, why do we have so many emails today? Which is all these different asks from TV, from edit, from programming, from marketing, for how to support The Last Dance, and NBA games that are airing tonight, and all of these different things that are happening, and the 2K tournament, and there's just lists of like, okay, this is what we're doing, how can you support it? So I think that, like you said, like it's challenging. Like, how are we going to do this creatively? How are we going to do these things if we don't have rights to these games, like NFL for the Monday Night Football games, and stuff like that. So I haven't had that much time to reflect quite yet. I'm like hoping that it slows down a little bit to the point where like we can breathe, but not hoping that it slows down to the point of like, wow, I'm bored, so now let me think about these things. So not quite yet, but hopefully by like July we'll have time to really reflect and look ahead to the next season. Like I was mentioning earlier, like I might be the college football lead for our team, but right now I'm also like trying to spearhead NBA games and help, turn focus to like esports, which I'm trying to like learn about as quickly as possible, and that sort of thing. So, just because we have like sport leagues on our team doesn't mean that like that's the sport that you work on year round. I still, last year I was traveling for the NBA finals, and some other events for our team. So not yet, hopefully by July, and we'll see.
Were you working on January 26th, 2020?
We both were.
I was the manager on duty that day, and I will never, ever forget it.
We're going to come back to that at the end. We got a question from Robert Sampson, which is one of the reasons why I wanted to put this together is what can schools do to best put you both in a position to be successful on a weekly basis? Like, how can they work with you and interact with you, even if they're not necessarily participating in the game, and help you be present on your social for the week?
Yeah.
I can like talk a little bit just from an SEC perspective, and it's obviously a little different than game day coming into town, but I know that we like at the SEC used to like, I leaned heavily on the schools and used a lot of like their resources to help our like social presence be better, or just like aligning with them on like some of the things that we were doing from the SEC perspective, especially surrounding like a championship event or whatever, like giving them a full like overview of like what are the things on social that we're going to be executing that might pertain to them, whether that means that they could like share it or they could contribute to it or whatever that looks like. I think it was important for just knowing who the school like social point of contact is like really helpful a lot of times, just because there might be things that they might want to amplify but don't see just because like there's so much going on, and so I think that like for me, like one thing I would say is just like the communication between the school and in this scenario like game day, being in town, or like even if it is like an SEC, like a conference office or something like that, just communicating between the two is helpful, because then you guys are kind of on the same page. Because at the end of the day, like you're kind of there to help each other, promote the show or promote the game or whatever it is. So I know that was always helpful for me. It was just knowing who to contact and just making sure, that we had each other's information. So if things came up and we needed assistance, then we could, communicate.
Annie?
Same answer. I think that we check our DMs like on like the ESPN CFB account. If schools have something that they're really excited about or think that we would be interested in amplifying at all, like DM us. There are some schools that do, which is great. If something happens in like practice that we would have no way of knowing about, like flag it to us. Like we try to be good internet partners and embed and tag your account and we will, do our best on our end to help grow yours too, and, get that exposure from an account with millions of followers. So I think that slide into our DMs. It sounds, so simple, but we really do look at it. I get emails for every time we get a DM. So just be, in communication with us. Send me an email, send me a DM on my personal or on the CFB account, and, we'll at least look at it. So just feel open to do that, and we encourage it.
Question here from Bonnie Ryan, who sent me the sweetest note the other day. Hi, Bonnie. How would you describe your strategy for each social platform for game day? Are you trying to reach a different audience or emphasize certain types of styles of content on one versus the other?
I think the biggest thing is that we design and produce our content differently for each platform. So I think that's the biggest thing. For Twitter, everything is more short form and in the live window. So it might be literally an in and an out of this one play. Because for us, in social in general, in the space, it's so important to be first. Our biggest thing is that it's most important to be accurate, but you also want to make sure that you are on the ball and you're first. So for Twitter, you'll see simple in and out. For Facebook, we will take a second to edit it, and we'll make sure that it's at least 30 seconds, 45 seconds. So we'll include here's the live angle, here's a replay, here's the pylon cam angle, the sky cam angle, whatever the case may be, whatever the best two angles are, and we'll just make it a little longer. For Instagram, we look to see say it's some crazy one-handed catch. We'll look to see if there's a photo that we have access to that we can use in a carousel, and we'll say okay, here's the best photo, here's the live angle, and we'll swipe to all of it. Because for us, we know that those engage better for us. If it's a crazy game, we'll build out an IGTV. If there's so much footage that we're all of this is good, we'll build out an IGTV because it's more consumable for fans. So it all depends on what specific content you're referring to. But we do edit things very particularly for each platform.
That's great. This question's from Mallory Heiser at Bowling Green. What's your advice on Instagram stories for an account that is covering multiple teams and events? For example, team accounts that have to cover a volleyball game, tennis, soccer, football, basketball, whatever, when you have back-to-back games on consecutive days. What?
You want to take that one?
Another angle to it as well is, obviously stories have to be up for 24 hours. Do you continue programming it, or do you wait till they expire before you add more to it?
So I can talk about that just a little bit, because I used to battle some of that at the SEC, especially during tournament season, because it's the same type thing. Games finish at whatever time the night before, 11 midnight, and then you get right back up and you're going again at noon. So I don't know if this is necessarily the best strategy per se, because it depends on what your strategy is around saving Instagram stories as highlights. I know everybody kind of does something different, but you obviously do have the option to delete story slides. The only problem there is when you do delete them, they're not going to be available for you to archive them in your highlights anymore. So I know sometimes if we were really heavy the day before on a 4-game day of SEC men's basketball, then I might go in and delete some that don't necessarily need to be there to tell the story, and aren't going to be detrimental to lose after a 10-hour span of them being up. So I think that's one way to cut it down if you really want to try to keep it within a certain number. But then I also think that if you know you're going to be having those games back to back 3 days in a row or whatever the sport is, I think if you can kind of plan out all right, for each game we're going to do maybe 4 or 5 slides, and then if those are up all weekend, you're still only totaling 15 slides, for the whole weekend span for games. I know that it can be a little unpredictable because the game could get really crazy, but so those are 2 things I found that would help us, was really storyboarding. I do not want to go over this limit of slides, even though we have 4 basketball games today. We got to figure out a way to condense it. And then if we did go over for whatever reason, just the next day, cutting down some of those. So if someone was coming in the next morning and hadn't seen this stuff, hadn't already watched yesterday's story, then at least they weren't having to click through 15 slides of something just to get to the fresh content. I guess it's probably a personal preference, like I said, because if you do delete them, you're not going to be able to save them in highlights. And you're obviously not going to get the full course of analytics for a full 24 hours. So that just really depends on what your goals are. But I think that those are like two tricks that I learned just from covering events like that are multiple games in a day plus multiple games back to back in 2 or 3 days of a span. And that happens obviously a lot with college athletics.
Interesting. For IG stories, do you shoot on iPhones or do you tend to shoot with cameras?
We shoot on iPhones. I don't think the only time we would use a camera for Instagram stories if it's something that's pre-produced. But we use phones for everything that's in real time. On the sidelines at games, it's always a phone.
I've heard this from a few people before that the technology coming through on Samsung's, or at least the camera, is a little bit better than what Apple's currently providing. Have you ever thought of or seen anyone that's been using Samsung products?
Yeah, I mean, Mike Powers does. One of our teammates is like team, like no iPhone, Samsung for life. And on some shots you can really see the quality difference on his phone. I think everyone else but him on our team uses iPhones. And I think, I don't know, I don't think it's so drastically different that it's like damaging if you don't use a Samsung. But it's just preference. Like it's the internet. It doesn't have to be 4K for someone to consume your content.
I do think too, like some people do produce, like, because we had brought in a video crew at the SEC and they were producing off of like DSLRs and stuff for the stories. And I think like the only thing that was about that was like, you could, if you're going to be producing off of like a camera, you probably need to do the whole story off of that, because you can tell a difference when you jump back and forth between like an iPhone camera and a DSLR or whatever you're using. So that like makes it more obvious. But if you're just shooting the whole story and producing it, on site and you're using your phone, then I agree with Annie. Like it's not that big of a deal. I just think like if you're whatever you want to do, maybe just pick one, because you can tell the difference like when you're going back and forth between a DSLR, like nice camera edited piece versus like, just your iPhone, camera. But obviously one thing I feel like everybody knows, but we don't ever shoot the videos in the Instagram app. You always should shoot them on your camera app and then upload them. Because when you shoot them in the app, the quality is bad for whatever reason.
Are you both also in charge of executing sponsored content?
Yes. So college football on our team has the most sales executions of any sport. So we do.
Why is that?
Because of all of our rights and how much ESPN owns, and how easy it is to sell with those rights. So, yes, we execute sales a lot. And with GameDay on site, there are sales executions. Our Instagram story is sold every weekend, like I think I talked about a little bit earlier. And like the headgear, Corso's headgear pick is also sponsored every week as well. So there's a lot of executions that we have to do each week. So GameDay is sold for like the show, and then when we go to like the games, all our Instagrams are sold between SportsCenter and ESPN. So when we're producing content for the game, we switch over to the ESPN or SportsCenter account to do Instagram stories on those.
Cool. Here's another one that's interesting. Does the game plan change, or what changes when you are covering a team like Notre Dame for GameDay?
Yep.
And they don't have ESPN coverage, but you still have GameDay there. What do you typically do?
It's a pain. The same goes for some CBS games, like the SEC CBS game we don't have rights to. So when GameDay goes to those games for Notre Dame, we don't have in-game rights. So we'll stick to using our talent, like Reese Davis or Coach Corso will stay for those games, and we'll tap into using them for like an intro, a middle, and an ending slide to get their like halftime analysis and their game analysis at the end, and have them like set the scene and all of that. And we'll get like crowd shots, we can get warm-ups, we can get everything up until like the game actually starts. So we just have to be a little more creative, and in scenarios like that, we really storyboard to say like, okay, we know Reese is going to this game, we can grab him, we can do, you know, coach at the end if we need him, we can do, you know, fan shots when they score touchdowns, and that sort of thing. So for games like that, we very much storyboard everything out to ensure that we can like fill our slots.
How much of your storyboard planning is tied into the game day production itself? Are you part of production meetings?
Yep, we go to production meetings every Friday with all of the talent and all of the producers, and we sit down on those. We don't necessarily use I guess what we would use is like we find out the guest picker in those meetings. We find out, you know, what team Coach Corso is going to pick for the headgear pick. So we use some of that stuff for storyboarding because say it's like Matthew McConaughey. So we'll go to those meetings and know like, okay, he's going to arrive on the bus at this time. I can meet him at the bus at this time. So I can go get a video for him that I'm going to put in my storyboard. And then I know like, okay, Coach Corso is picking LSU. So I know I can think in advance of like what LSU gifts do I want to use and like what copy do I want to use on the slide and that sort of thing. So from that aspect, yeah, we storyboard based on the information that's given out in those meetings. But otherwise we don't use like any of the broadcast footage in our Instagram stories. Everything that we get is from what we film on site ourselves.
Cool. Before we get to the last question, I want to get back to something that I kind of touched on, which is the Kobe Bryant's passing. And you said, Annie, that you're running point on all the content that was coming out from social accounts. Just talk us through a little bit through like what was happening behind the scenes, and were you in tears? Like I couldn't imagine.
I think you know, there's a line between like, you know, human emotion and making sure that you do your job. I was a journalism major and had to cover a lot of things when I was in school and had to work for a student paper, whether it was like crime, any of that sort of thing. So I think that like that really prepared me for something like this because, you know, a lot of it, you're just in shock. You're like, this isn't real. Like Kobe Bryant didn't die today. Like this can't be real. So you go through the whole like stage of like shock and you're like, okay, but I have to do my job. Like this is really tragic and sad and unimaginable, but we have to get this information out to our fans who, you know, after we tweeted it from SportsCenter, you know, all of the like a lot of the comments were like, SportsCenter's late. And it's like, okay, guys, you know, there's always going to be trolls on the internet, fine. But for us, like, we were working very closely with our news desk and saying like when, you know, they were confirming with police and making sure, you know, that all of the facts were true before we tweeted it. So I think there's that like line of like, some people thought we were slow and some people will say like, well, it came from SportsCenter, so I know that it was accurate and I know that this is real. So for us, it's more important to make sure that we have all of the facts and all of the information before delivering anything. And that's just, you know, ESPN at its core is journalism and is a media company, and that's most important to be right. So people will say that we were late, and that's fine. They can say whatever they want, but we were completely accurate in all of our coverage. And, you know, Anna and I were on that day together. She had been at ESPN for 2 weeks at that point, and we worked the next 3 days together. So we worked through all of the like aftermath of the coverage. And
I was gonna say, I feel like Annie, like she was the shift leader that day, and then Annie has one other new direct report that started the same day as me. And we all were there that day, worked until whatever time, like 6, until the night shift got on. And then we were there the following 3 days. And then we also had the pleasure of working on the day of the memorial. So we really saw that story from start to finish. But by the end of it, we knew, like, it was almost like we learned how to do it. And I mean, not that our other teammates didn't have to cover this too, but we just obviously were there in the initial, like, I went to the bathroom and came back and Kobe Bryant had died, like, essentially is what happened. Like, I came back and I was like, what happened? And literally, like, that was what had happened. And it's crazy to think about, but like, it just happened so fast. Like, the reports were just swirling, obviously. And like Annie said, we spent a lot of time like trying to get it right. And I think that like, it was just one of those things where like, in the moment you just are doing what you're doing. But when I got home and or even in the car, like I just let it all out because it was just, it's still right now, it doesn't feel real. But yeah, it was kind of like one of those things where I'll never forget like being there that day, but also just like seeing the whole story through up until the memorial, because I feel like we really got to like, we got so comfortable with the story and sharing it and understanding the ins and outs of it that we were able to like do it justice by the time we got to the Memorial Day.
Yeah. And so much of it in real time was like, okay, like, and you grab Twitter, like Dylan, you start making the Facebook, edit, you start doing Instagram, like someone called the news desk again and double check to see where we're at with them. And it was very much like, you do this, you do this, you do this. Like, you just know, like once you cover news enough, you just know, like, these are the things that we have to have right off the bat. And we can circle back to come up with, follow-ups and all of that. But we need photos of Kobe by himself. We need photos of him and Gigi. We need to make sure that we're crossing everything off, from the SportsCenter tweet to the ESPN information to the NBA account to our ESPNW account. It applied across the board to everything that we, run. So to make sure that we're like touching bases on all of those things. And I can't say this enough. Like, the most important thing for us was to make sure that we were accurate in our reporting, and that everything was worded correctly. We were following AP style, journalism standards, everything across the board. We made sure we were so buttoned up so that, nothing would go wrong.
I couldn't imagine working on that day, and let alone having to program the story behind that. Props to you both. Like, the coverage was really outstanding. I know and it was a tearjerker, just even opening up Instagram and seeing every single post that you were making. So props to both of you. Great work. And we're going to get back into a couple more questions that popped in. Elise from South Florida. During games, if you know you're only going to post 10 to 12 frames in the story, how do you pick how many videos you take per quarter? And how do you make sure you did not put 10 shots only from the first half and then you can only do 2 during the second half?
And you want to answer? I'm going to grab my charger. Hold on.
Yeah, I think for me, so like while I was at the SEC, I didn't necessarily have an exact number I was shooting for. It just kind of depended on the game, but I always like probably kept it like under like 15. But I think what I do, and this is like a personal thing, but like I'm shooting like at that LSU game where they just kept scoring, like I'm shooting that whole game, but you're still kind of having to be out there as one person. You can't run to the tunnel or you're going to miss something. So you kind of wait till like a timeout or maybe till like commercial or whatever break you have in the game. And I think at that moment you can assess like, okay, what 5 shots did I just take? And is there one out of that that's like really worth it? Because if you just get like trigger happy and just start posting, then all of a sudden you're going to have 10 slides posted. But then when you look back, like maybe in the next quarter or at halftime, you might realize like, oh, those didn't have to be posted. So I think like you might be shooting 5 clips at a time and then you have a minute to breathe. And I think when you take that minute to breathe, like really think to yourself, like which one of these are all of these really great, or is it just one, versus like just trying to get them all out fast. I think sometimes we feel like we need to do it quick, but that's not always the case. Like you do have some time to kind of breathe and assess what you've shot and decide which one of those is the best one to put up.
Next question from Bonnie again. Anne, I always enjoyed the content you had on your stories during the SEC's basketball and baseball championships. How are you deploying your content creators through multiple games in one day?
Yeah. First of all, thank you. So we had, the last year, I guess calendar year, and they were supposed to be hired through this year, but obviously things are different. But we had actually hired an outsourced video company. So what I would do is they were kind of in charge of being the content creators for like our recaps for the day, and whether that was like on any platform, they were kind of doing all of it. But I also had 2 student volunteers, 2 or 3 from our schools that we would reach out to that would come and they would have the opportunity. So they were kind of running point for our Instagram story. So they worked really closely with our outsourced video team to say like, all right, I kind of let them honestly storyboard the story, as just with oversight was more of my role. But I think the way that we did it best was just making sure that, again, back to what I just said, like taking our time and deciding like what content needs to go on the story and looking at the layout for each game. And that was the best way to like kind of get that done for baseball and basketball, because those days are extremely long, especially baseball. There's 17 games in like 6 days. So it's, it's one of those things where I wasn't rushing them to be first or urgent. It was more just like, all right, I'm going to have the volunteers be the ones that are posting the story and adding the copy and all of the frills, but our content creators were in charge of shooting like recap stuff, and like putting together a quick like 15-second slide that like captured the game or anything like that. But yeah, I feel like the best thing that they did was just work together to produce the story, so that it wasn't like the content creators who were creating our recaps were on a whole different page than the person that was actually like hitting send on the Instagram story. And then I think too, like between games, looking back at what we did and saying like, okay, do we need to change it up, or like, where are we at? Like, what are things looking like? Just taking the time to really like go back through and look at things, I think was helpful during those moments, because the days obviously get long. So.
Awesome. Last question, both of you, from Gabby Hutter at UNC Charlotte. What is the number one piece of advice you have for someone who wants to do something like what you do?
Let's see. I mean, I feel like there's a lot of pieces of advice, because it's one of those jobs where there's a lot of nuances that you learn about it when you do it. But I guess what I would say is just always be like, I don't know, like combine into one. Like don't take things personally, and be willing to like know that there are different ways to do things, because this is a profession that is ever evolving. I feel like we can all like feel like we're not doing a good enough job, but really it's just platforms are changing, or the way that things, the way that fans react are changing. And I think it's really good to just be able to like take a step back and like take a breath and be like, okay, like this isn't working anymore. Like what can we do now? And just knowing that happens. Because I think that's one thing that like, even just now starting in this job, there have been plenty of times where I'm like, okay, well, I thought I knew what I was doing, but maybe I don't, And I think just being able to like tell yourself it's okay, and having the like, having a backbone and saying like, it's going to be fine. It's just things change a lot in social media, and we all know that. And I think that just being able to go with that is helpful.
Yeah, I think there's so many things in this world that you can't control, but what you can control is your attitude and your work ethic. And I think that, when I was in college, I took like every opportunity that came to me, no matter what it was, no matter if it was, a volunteer event that I didn't get paid to do, like most things are in sports. And, just worked really hard and made as many connections as I could. I get told all the time, like, wow, ESPN was your first job out of college. Like, how did you do it? You're so lucky. And so much of it was working and being told no, and then trying again. When I first applied for an internship at ESPN, I didn't get it. And I applied again and got it my last semester of college. And when I applied for a full-time job after I graduated, I didn't get it. And then I had to apply for 2 more, and then finally got in a few months later. And I think that, there are always going to be a lot of different opportunities, and it might not be exactly what you want at first, but it'll help, build your path to what you do want.
Well, thank you both. I know it's late for taking the time to drop some knowledge for everyone here. Truly appreciate it. For everyone else, please, sign up for the next session we have tomorrow with Justin Satzman, who's going to run through what paid social looks like. Nikki just dropped it in the chat. And thanks again, Annie. Ann, stay safe out in Bristol.
Yeah.
Yeah. Thank you. Yeah. Be safe. Everyone take care.
Yeah. Thanks, guys.